Perfect. And here we go. So thank you everyone for joining our fourth session. I can't believe we are already at our session. This spring semester seems to have just flown by, but I'm real excited to have everyone here because today we're going to talk about contextualizing lesson plans that align to our ELL goals. So this is going to be a really fun, I feel like. So one of the things that I do want you guys just to keep in mind is that all of our webinars and workshops have been scaffolding on each other. So if you feel like a little lost or if you feel like there's something that you maybe need to brush up on, we will be talking about some of the things that we have talked about in the past. So you are always more than welcome to go back and look at those. Those are on the DELT YouTube page, correct, Jamie? And they are also on Propel. And so there's a lot of different places where you can go. They're always available for you to go back, refresh, or just get more information that you might need. Oh, here we go. My name is Meriah Guillen, and I am really excited to be sharing this material with you. And our moderator is the wonderful Jamie. She's there in the chat. So if you do have any questions or you have any comments, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and Jamie will either answer them if she can, or if she'll stop me, she'll say, hey, stop talking, you're talking too much. Go ahead and answer this question. So always feel free to use that chat button as much as possible. So we're going to jump right in here. Today we are going to talk about instructional strategies to teach contextualized curriculum. We're also going to talk about what exactly is contextualized curriculum, and then design lesson plans that integrate these contextualized activities that align with learners' goals. So again, we have talked about lesson plans in the past, so we're not going to take too much time talking about that. But if it is something you would like to discuss later on, we definitely can do that as well. Perfect. So I'm going to just open up the floor, kind of give you guys started, and I want this to be interactive. I want you guys to feel like you guys have a voice in this as well. But I want to ask you, what does it mean to you to contextualize materials?
And since we do have a small group, please feel free to either put your answer in the chat or simply unmute and verbally answer the question. Also, feel free to say you have no idea.
That is a great answer. Thank you, Jamie, for that. I didn't even think about it. Perfect. All right. I'm going to take it as I am not sure what that. I should have had this like a multiple choice question. What do you feel like it is?
We actually got them both in the chat. So Jennifer says, I think it's about making content relevant to students. Ooh, yes. And Dr. Tran says, looking at the bigger picture and breaking it down for students to understand.
Perfect. I love those answers. I love it when answers are like, well, I think that's my whole presentation. There we go. We can go home now. No. Thank you guys so much for sharing that in the comments. Yes, pretty much contextualizing means, putting the materials in a way that is relevant to your students. And so we're going to just go over this right quick. So a contextualized lesson builds content knowledge. So it's really trying to get them to feel like you're not just teaching them concepts, you're teaching them how to utilize it in the greater world. So this can be with your reading and math, or reading and writing skills, math skills, soft skills. We're trying to just not to take our concepts that we are teaching in class and bring them into a wider world perspective. And one of the definitions that I really liked and the interpretations comes from a TSTM workshop or definition, which pretty much just means it's an effective way to bring materials to life. And in order to do this, you need to have a needs assessment and an interest inventory just to let you know which content will be most meaningful to your learners. Having a contextualized approach means that you are trying to meet the student's needs, not necessarily what you feel, but it does involve getting that researching the skills that they need, the language that they might need, depending on your area, and how it will work within their given lifestyle. So one of the things that Jamie and I were talking about earlier is for my students, it makes a lot of sense for me to bring materials that would relate to agriculture and dairies, because that's what we have around here. We have a lot of dairy workers. We have a lot of people who work in factories and stuff like that. Whereas if I were to go to Albuquerque, there probably wouldn't be that big of a need. The need would be a little bit different, maybe more so in uh, working in stores and the customer service. There might be a huge shift. So what would work for me as a contextualized lesson may not work for others because the needs are different across the board. Cool. Where do I start? This is such a great question because we throw this concept around. We use this word all the time. Let's have contextualized materials and make sure you are contextualizing your materials. And a lot of times we're like, okay, sounds great, but where exactly do I start with all of this? So when you're thinking about contextualizing materials, the first place and the first question you want to ask yourself are, what are the student's goals? If you don't know what your student goals are, then you kind of are sitting there just kind of figuring it out on your own. And one of the things that we always want to say is that these classes are for your students. They're not for us. We know the material, we know the content, but how can I meet my students' needs? And that's exactly where it is. Our last webinar that we had talked about student goals and how to set goals. So if you are needing like a document, this is a really good document that I use a lot, and I should have given it to Jamie so she could put it in the chat. We'll put it in the chat later. But it's just to get an idea because all the students are going to have different goals, but at some point there will be a common ground. A lot of our ELL students say, well, my goal is to learn English. Well, that's great, but why? What is your need? Are you wanting it for work? Are you wanting it to help your kiddos with school? Or are you wanting it because you want to become a teacher someday or something like that? What are those goals? So that way you can find the common ground. It's very hard to meet the needs of every single individual because every single individual is going to be different and unique. But if you can find that common ground, that's what you want to do. So what are the students' goals? The next thing you have to think about is, what do you need to teach? All of us are in some sort of program where we have a curriculum or we have materials that are absolutely need to present. So what do you need to teach and how do they align to the students' goals? In a perfect world, or not a perfect world, but in I'm going to say a perfect world, we would be able to teach whatever we wanted and how we wanted and just reach their needs. That is not realistic. I guess I should say that. In a realistic world, no, in a perfect world. In our realistic world, there we go. All my words are getting together, but we'll get there. We would love to be able to just teach whatever was the need at that point, but we have to be realistic about it. And what is our curriculum saying that we need to accomplish within a given time? I know with my teachers, I absolutely love when they think outside the box, but a little too much outside the box, we miss the target of what we actually need to be teaching our students. So we really want to make sure that, what do we need to teach to see students succeed? And then after all of that, where do these concepts meet? Where do students' goals and the teacher goals, where do they meet, and how can we get them all together? Okay. So I did this quick little pyramid, and it's a surprise pyramid. I love my pyramids, okay? But you want to think about this as scaffolding all on each other. Is you have to build one concept onto the other. So the first one is you need to know the student goals. If you don't have a goal for the students, you can teach them anything, but it won't be relevant to them. And so we need to know, where are the students' needs? How can I get them from one step to another? So you want to start with that base, is the student goals, and get that in your mind that I need to teach towards their goals, not my goals, because my goals would be teaching them history and teaching them all kinds of materials. I got really excited because in my ESL class, we do one book a month. We are always reading one book. And so I always have like this list of books that they can read because they're all aligned to a movie. So we usually read a book for 4 weeks and then we watch the movie. Well, had I had my way, I would have chosen a completely different book than what they wanted. But I really have to think about, what is their needs. A lot of them were talking about like citizenship, and a lot of them wanted to do citizenship. And so one of the things that they knew they needed was to study like the civics and the history. So because of all of that, I had to focus my attention a little bit more on the historical. aspect and like citizenship. And so we had a lot of different books that we could choose from. Um, where I was still teaching what I needed to and presenting the materials, but they were able to pick based on what they needed. And so it's a little bit of a shift because, we all have what we want to teach and how we think it should go, but we really need to come back to that basic of what are the students' goals and needs. After that, we need to figure out what are our teachers' goals and abilities. What does the teacher need to teach? And what are the program and teacher goals? As a program, you guys have goals. Everyone does at some point. What our goals here at CCC are not going to be the same goals as what you may have at, I believe, Santa Fe Community College, or Jamie is at that college. So they're not going to be the same. And so you have to think about what is your program goals and what do you guys want to achieve and how can you go to that next step.
And by the way, it took me so long to unmute, so I am sorry. It's Albuquerque Adult Learning Center.
There we go. I know it was
ABQALC.
There we go. Too many letters this
I
morning.
know, right? So many.
Awesome. I saw you out of the corner of my eye. I was like, oh, I'm going to get this so wrong, but it's all right.
It is fine.
And then at the very top, that's when, once you have figured out your student goals and your teacher goals and abilities, that's when you can find the content that will match both goals. If you miss one, you'll have a huge block missing. So if I just go straight from student goals to content, then I've left out the most important, or not the most important, but a very important part, which is what is the teacher goals and abilities. A lot of times we like to dream big, and of course, funding definitely doesn't always allow us to do that. Resources, materials don't always allow us to do that. So you want to make sure that you're not missing out and missing any of these parts. Each part is important. Student goals and teacher goals are going to be very important, but that base foundation, you need to start with student goals in order to figure out what context you need to be teaching in. So let's talk about student goals right quick. You want to think about short-term goals and long-term goals. That's going to help you with your curriculum. Depending on how your courses are set up, you might focus a little bit more on the short-term goals, getting students in and out pretty quickly. If your program extends a little bit longer, you might want to think about long-term goals. And this, again, it changes with every program. For us, we do short and long-term goals, but most of our sessions are 4-week sessions. So we do 4 weeks, then we have a registration period, and then we do another 4 weeks. So we focus a lot on short-term goals. What do you want to learn in the next 4 weeks? And we go from there. We have a couple of other students that are maybe online or a little bit more of distant learners. So we talk about long-term goals because our classes and our sessions are a little bit longer than just a simple 4 weeks. So you want to think about what their goals are, and maybe not even just for your program, but what are their goals for 5 years down the road or 6 years down the road? I think we usually go by 5s. So 5 to 10 years, where do they see themselves? What do they want to do? You really want to look at those student goals and see where they are trying to direct themselves. And another important thing is focusing on the needs versus wants. We have a lot of students that have a lot of wants, which is great. I'm not saying that wants are horrible, but we also need to focus on what is the need. I know a lot of students of mine who really, really want to study because we just finished a book, and so they really want to dive into World War II, which is always a lot of fun, but the need for, say, their citizenship would be focusing on civics and structure and a little bit of history, but more of the civics and understanding their rights and responsibilities as potential U.S. citizens. So we really have to think about the needs and the wants and what is going to best fit our students. With the goals that they have in mind. So like I said, if a student is trying to come in to get their citizenship, we want to focus on those needs. Whereas if a student has their citizenship and just wants to learn more about the U.S. history, then we could modify that a little bit as well. But it's all about, what are their goals and those needs versus wants. Teacher goals. And I know I've already touched on this a little bit, but we want to think about the curriculum that we are given that we absolutely need to teach. For our program, we use Ventures as well as Burlington English. We have a set curriculum. We have every day what you're supposed to be teaching. That's just our goals. And of course, it is a skeleton. And so teachers are allowed to fluff, add as much as they want, but we ask that they don't take away, just because we do need to have a set curriculum um, put up in there. We also have to think about the limitations. What we have available might not be available to other programs. Our program does have like a lot of technology, and we're always using technology, but we also want to think about, how do we have a healthy balance of both? Or if you are in a program that you don't have technology, how can you utilize or teach some of the skills that students want with knowing those limitations? I know a lot of us want to shoot for the moon, which is great, but we also have to be realistic and say, all right, I want to do this, but I can only do that. I never feel bad about those limitations. You can always do so much with what you're given, just as long as you're willing to do some exploration. There are so many websites, so many materials online that can help. And then, of course, what we want to do here as part of the learning support team or the distant learning support team is that we want to make sure that we are building a community where you guys can collaborate with teachers across the state. This isn't just about me getting up here and presenting materials to you. This is trying to build a community of teachers where you can share ideas with different programs around the state. Nancy's usually on here, and she's the first person that comes to mind because she's always engaged in these webinars. And so I always think about her when I'm thinking about this, because you can always reach out to someone else and say, hey, these are my limitations. What can I do with it? Or what would you suggest? It's always good to have that exploration. And, everyone has limits. Nobody has limitless options. We always have some sort of limitations, but you can always explore and figure out how can you overcome those and build a curriculum and build material that is going to best help your students. Finding the middle ground probably is the hardest thing. So you have these two ideas. How do they meet in the middle? You always want to teach towards those goals, your goals and the students' goals. So this can work in a variety of ways. One of the things that I like to do in my classroom is have like post-it notes or bullet or big O sticky notes and put like what each student is wanting to do within that week or within that month. And we always have some sort of goals. Like my last one was my students wanted to know tongue twisters, why they wanted to know tongue twisters. This one was a weird one. Why they wanted to know tongue twisters, I don't know, but because they wanted to practice their pronunciation, which made a lot of sense. So we did a lot of things like that, where we had to talk about how the words sounded or figuring out what their accent was and going back and forth. So I always taught towards the goal while integrating all of the materials that I needed for everyday activities. So this last 4 weeks, what we did was civics. We did a lot of civics. So teaching civics and tongue twisters really was hard because there was no middle ground, but we ended up like looking at different things. And especially when you're reading some of those documents and you realize a lot of them have repetitive words or words that are very, very similar, we found out how we could maybe take it and practice speaking it over and over and over. So you really have to find, sometimes it's really easy. Oh, like if they want to know present, past tense, and future tense, okay, that's easy. That's not a problem. But it gets a little bit more challenging when they are very specific about the language that they want to learn. So you want to teach towards the goals and integrate content into everyday life. And I think that's where we're going to really tie all of this in, is how can they take the materials that you are presenting in your classrooms and make it relevant to their life today, not tomorrow, but how can you make it relevant into their everyday life? And so a lot of times we want to think about, again, what are their goals for if they have kids, if they are trying to find work, if they're trying to get their citizenship, or maybe they're just wanting to do everyday shopping. What are those goals that we can help to explain everyday life? So how so? And I kind of jumped ahead. So one of the things I really, really like doing is having students bring in materials from their home into the classroom, because I can have a very different perspective. Most of the time, any flyers I get go into the trash, and then, of course, we go scrambling to dig them back out at the end. But most of the time, because I don't think about it, I just throw them away. Whereas a lot of our students hold on to those materials because they feel they're so important. So I tell them if there's something that your kiddo brings home from school or something from work or the stores that you are having trouble with, bring it in so we can evaluate it. So if a student or has a kiddo who's in school, have them bring those, have them bring those notes from school, whether it's a field trip note or an announcement, something like that. Have them bring it in so that way they can talk it through and find some either grammar concepts or just trying to interpret comprehension. Have them bring those in. If it's work, they can be documents, preferably not documents where they're like, help me fill this out, but documents where they're like, can you help me understand this? You want to be a little bit careful with that because that also goes with the same, like if they're wanting citizenship, you want to make sure you don't cross that line, but bringing flyers or materials that they just need help understanding, not filling out, but help understanding. Going to stores or whenever they bring those promotions and advertisements, probably one of my favorites because they are so complex sometimes for students if they don't have very simple writing. You know how sometimes the advertisements are like 3 pages long of information that nobody really wants to read. So sometimes just bringing those in, just things around their house, so that way it's relevant to them, where they're going home and they're saying, oh, I see this and I want to bring it to class so that way I can better understand it. Or I have this document, I want to take it to class to see if I can interpret it a little bit. So they can bring anything, but as long as it comes from their perspective. Again, we can bring in, I didn't realize this, but I still get newspapers. I asked my class, how many of you guys have a newspaper? And they just gave me this blank stare. And I was like, oh man, am I the only one who reads newspapers? And I didn't realize that a lot of people like to read it like on their tablet or on Facebook. And that's what they told me. So what's relevant for me might not be relevant for my students. And so we really want to take it from the student's perspective and have them bring in the material that will best fit them. So just kind of keep that. And I always think that's funny because I say it all the time. I'm like, yeah, just go and look in your newspaper. And they just look at me. What's a newspaper? Oh man, don't say that. Don't say that. All right. So here is an example lesson of something that you could do. So, and I just pulled this offline right quick. This isn't something that any student brought in, but this could be something that you do in your classroom. So this would be a letter to the parents from the school. And one of the things that I know I focus on heavily is learning that past and present tense or identifying verbs. So if you're doing this with your students, you could say, here is a material. I want you to go in and circle all of the verbs that are in the present tense. All right, so they go through, circle all the verbs that are in the present tense, and then you could say, now change them to past tense. Or how would you say this if this event happened in the past? Why would it change it? Why would this be important? How would it work if we worked it in the past? Or you could say, how would you do it in the future? And this would be if I was teaching verb tenses. Now, of course, there's so much that you could do with here, but this would be like a contextualized lesson. So many times we give our students worksheets and say, put these sentences or fill in the blanks with present tense verbs. Okay, that's great, but how is it connecting to their real life? And so I do this a lot, and especially with verbs, because that seems to be one of the things that our student or my students get confused with the most. So I'll have them find an article that they want or an article that they've been reading, a letter, anything like that, and we talk about the verbs. Or we even talk about prepositions and how do you use prepositions in everyday language? How would this look? And a lot of them do focus on talking. So we talk about how would you communicate this if it was a face-to-face conversation? Or one of my favorites is having students go to different rooms and calling them and say, oh, our school district, all students have to attend the musical festivals where they have to do like a phone call. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but you start with what they need. So if a student brought this in, I could take it and maybe not that day, but I could definitely take a couple of days to look at it and say, all right, this is what I want to do with this. I want to go in this direction. I want to teach verbs, or I need to teach, because we all have curriculum, I need to teach past tense. One of the ones that is really hard for my students is the imperfect tense, or a passive voice. One of the big things that we're having to teach is passive voice. If we all, I don't know if you are writers or anything, you know how frustrating the passive voice can be. But one of the part of our curriculum is teaching the passive voice versus active voice. And so we could go back and forth and say, this is what passive voice would look like. This is what active voice would look like. There's so many different activities that you could do, but if you give them a material that they feel is going to connect with them, they're going to be able to understand it just a little bit better and feel a little bit more confident in saying, oh, this is how it would look in real life, rather than just saying, Sally went to the store and bought five, or Sally went to the store and blinked 5 apples. A buy, bought, or is buying. You know, this actually gives them an opportunity to say, hey, this is how you would see it in a letter, or this is how you would see it in an advertisement. This is how you would see it in a work activity. So it's all about creating what is best for them and how can you put it into context is the simplest thing of saying it. So how can we do this? Finding those student goals. That's going to be your first point. Finding the student goals and utilizing the materials that maybe they bring to you or that you know is being sent out across. You know, if you have students who have kiddos, maybe you can be part of the parent newsletter. You can sign up for stuff like that. So that way you can see what is being sent out as well. If you know some of your students, like for me, I said earlier, is that a lot of our students come from um, dairy farms. They're dairy workers. A lot of them are veterinarians. So sometimes I'll just call down and say, hey, what is something that you see your students are struggling with? And this is also part of our IET program that we had. So that's a little bit more extensive, but you could reach out and see, all right, what is the need for a lot of parents, or what is the need for a lot of English language learners? What can I best help them with? And get that idea. And that's why I said it's always good to start like a board that shows what are the similar goals. How can we best reach all of the people? And again, you're not going to be able to target everyone all the time, but you can get an idea of where that baseline is. How can we reach each other on that equal level? So that is all. And I just, like I said, this is just the webinar, just to give you some ideas to get you starting. But we're going to have a workshop on May 23rd that is contextualizing lesson plans to align to ELL goals. So at this point, you guys can think about what you would like to do. I'm going to have some activities. So things that I have seen in my classroom that I can show you how to either talk about goals, talk about lesson plans, talk about contextualizing. We're just going to come together on the 23rd for a workshop and go over, have a big share out, because this is a community activity. This isn't just me telling you what to do. This is getting all of our ideas and sharing them across the board. So that is all that we have for today. Are there any questions?
Actually, there's no question, Mariah, but on the goals that you talk about, the short-term goal and long-term goal, I think it's best for us to define them, what a short-term goal looks like, and specify that for our students and ourselves, because some people short-term goal might mean different to others, along with a long-term goal. So when we say short-term goal, are we referring to maybe a couple months? Are we referring to like 6 months or something like that? Because our short-term goal is different from others.
That is actually a really good point. Is short-term goal is going to be whatever you define as short-term. So for example, in our program, we talk about a short-term goal as 4 weeks because that's when our term ends. Um, Overall, for ESL students, we typically say if they start in level 2, they won't get out of level 2 until they'll start in August. They won't get out of it until May. So their long-term goal would be until the end of our school year, whereas a short-term goal would be every 4 weeks. So short-term really has your own definition. Whatever you feel like a short-term goal is for your class and your program, that's going to be it. It really depends up to you. Some people say 3 months, some people say 2 weeks. It depends also on what you're talking about. So let's say it like this. If you're losing weight, short-term goal might be 3 months or every 2 weeks. That could also be set up by a doctor. You know, something like that would be a little bit different. In the classroom, it could be 1 month, it could be 6 months for short term. If we were doing like a long program, it could be 1 year to 5 years. It just really depends on what your definition of short term and long term is. That was a really good point, though. I hope I answered that.
You guys are the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much.
Were there any other questions?
There were no other questions. Jennifer did have to hop off. She did say thank you. But that is all.
Awesome. So thank you everyone for coming, and don't forget our workshop on the 23rd at 12:30.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Enjoy your afternoon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.